This is Living Power with Dan Hurst.
Now, our study in Revelation couldn't come at a better time, obviously, because of what's going on in the world today. And I want to address that issue, because this takes us into a transition. We're going to get to studying about the 7 churches, and you're going to see why that's so important here shortly. I mentioned last Sunday that in the Old Testament we have the history of God and His people. That's the Old Testament. So we study about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and all those great patriarchs, and we know about them, and we've studied them, and we see them in the Bible, and we learn of these great men and women of God who sought after Him and obeyed Him. You know how God, and by the way, I say men and women, because God used both. I mean, the first prophet was a prophetess. You know, think about that. You know, God held women at this exalted state also. So it's important for us to understand that the Bible reveals how God uses His people. And then in the New Testament, we see these great men and women who walked with Jesus. They were there, so there's the history of God and His people when He was on earth as Messiah. And then, after Jesus is resurrected and ascended into heaven, there's a section that's devoted to the history of God's people that started and developed the church. Acts is the beginning of that. As you study Acts, you begin to see what happened with the early church, and then all of those letters that are written to the churches and everything from Acts on. Now, that's a history of the early church. But now, in the first 3 chapters of Revelation, we see the history of God and His people who close out that age and usher in the end times. We call this period the church age. The prophet Joel spoke about that. In Joel chapter 2, verses 28 through 31, he said, "And it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my Spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions. Even on the male and female servants in those days I will pour out my Spirit, and I will show wonders in the heavens and on the earth, blood and fire and columns of smoke. The sun shall be turned to darkness, the moon to blood, before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes." Now, people tend to look at that and lump it all together and just say, oh, this is what's going to happen. You know, in the end times, people are going to be prophesying and dreaming dreams and seeing visions, and the Spirit of God is going to come out on us, and there's going to be all these signs and wonders. But really what that's saying is there are 2 things that are happening in that passage. And I want you to see this. In the book of Acts, Peter says something that most people miss. Pentecost had come. That was one of the feasts of the 7 Jewish feasts. And this time of Pentecost, which Pentecost means 50, and it's 50 weeks from one of the previous feasts. And the Holy Spirit came on the followers of Christ in a powerful way. We've studied about that, and we've seen it. We'll be looking at it again sometime, I'm sure. But listen to how Peter explained it. In Acts chapter 2, verses 16 through 18. "But this is what was uttered through the prophet Joel." Peter was explaining this to the people who were thinking, these people are drunk or something. This is odd. What's going on with these people? And he said, "This is what was uttered through the prophet Joel. In the last days it shall be, God declares, that I will pour out my Spirit on all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. Even on my male servants and female servants in those days I will pour out my Spirit, and they shall prophesy." Now remember, prophecy in the New Testament, the word that's used is the word to tell. In the Old Testament, prophecy means to foretell. But in the New Testament, it's a different word, and it means to tell about or to proclaim. And so in this, when we're looking at this passage and it's talking about prophecy, it's not talking about foretelling, it's talking about proclaiming. And that's exactly what happened in that 2nd chapter of Acts. What Peter was saying was that this that you are now seeing, and that's the word he uses, and this is what was uttered through the prophet Joel. And this that you're seeing right now, that you have evidence of, this is evidence of the Holy Spirit. And it is what the prophet Joel was talking about. And that was the introduction to the church age. But the end of the church age is prophesied by Joel this way. in chapter 2, verses 28, 31. And I will show wonders in the heavens and on the earth, blood and fire and columns of smoke. The sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. So there's two different things that happen there in that passage in Joel. Joel says the introduction of the church age is going to happen by the coming of the Holy Spirit, and this is how it's going to be revealed. And the end of the church age is going to come in these two verses here. I'll show you these signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth, blood and fire and columns of smoke. And that end of the church age is the history of God and us. So there you are. You're in the Bible. In the Old Testament, the people who were there, as God developed His people. In the New Testament, it was the early church, or the church hadn't been formed. It was the people who walked with Christ when Christ was Messiah on earth. And then there was the history of the people that started the church. And now in these first 3 chapters of Revelation, it's us. We're the ones that are there in the Bible. We're God's people mentioned in the Bible in the first 3 chapters of Revelation.
On behalf of Dan Hurst and the Open Class, we want to thank you for watching. We hope it was a blessing.